And I am so glad that everybody is here. This is our first Occaneechi self-defense class, and I met Sean at a festival in Hillsborough. Actually, he came over to my table, and he walked away, but then he came back, and then he said, I got this idea. So from last year to now, we have been planning, trying to get the dates together when we could get, like a self-defense class, like a basic self-defense class. The concern is that, a lot of indigenous women are attacked, murdered, raped, and different things. Not only indigenous women, but, women of all colors. And what he's going to show us some basic self-defense techniques that could, you never know to thwart that, because, I think a lot of times people are always like from behind, they like grab from behind or something like that, or, take you off guard. But, he graciously donated his time to us to come today. And I'm just thankful for all your support, for everybody being here today, taking the time out of your day to be here. I really appreciate it. We're trying to increase member participation. We open it up to the community, so it's just not for the tribal community, but we kind of open it up for the community. So I'm not going to say much more, but I'm going to give you Sean, and he's going to tell you about himself, because it was too long for me to remember.
This has been about a year, maybe a year and a quarter or something in the making. So I have a passion for self-protection, and I've been doing martial arts about 30 years. About 2 years ago, I was approached by a friend of a friend who wanted to do something down in Ecuador with victims who had been trafficked. Almost all of those are indigenous Ecuadorians. That kind of stemmed a process in my mind. I used to ride for an organization called BACA, Bikers Against Child Abuse. I did that for about 5.5 years. That process really made me aware of just how jacked up the justice system is. It is completely set up. Really, if I'm honest, it's set up for money. And I know this for personal reasons. I just went through a long battle with my daughter, and there was just no interest on actually finding the truth. It was all about process. And so that made me really aware of just how this setup is. And the time that I spent with abused children kind of made me aware. And even then, my numbers aren't as bad as a woman's numbers, which aren't as bad as indigenous numbers. Indigenous numbers in the US, Native American numbers all the way up through Canada, 66% of women are looking at sexual assault. 1 in 3 is what we're talking about for sexual violence generally, but when you get into, again, Native American culture, you're actually looking at 1 in 3 are raped. So there's a lot of data that is horrible. You can't really say it any other way. You can try to make it sound better. About 25% of Native American children suffer from PTSD. The other thing that most people don't really address, I think, in self-defense, self-protection, is that more than 50% of the time, across the board in any racial category, it's somebody that is a family member, 55-ish%. And then you go into neighbors, friends, and then you go into acquaintances. It's only about 7, 8, 9, 10% that is strangers. The difficulty when you teach a self-defense class is, I could teach you how to just break out of grabs and holds. I could teach little kids how to defend themselves. But the problem is that they're not going to recognize that it's Uncle Joe. It's because Uncle Joe has been given family authority already, because he's his uncle. How do you teach a kid to fight back against Uncle Joe, Dad, or whoever? The situation is different than most self-defense instructors portray. So I like to start a little bit differently. I want to start on something that I would call non-physical skills. Some people call them soft skills. But what it's really about is helping you start to recognize where you're being preyed upon. What we talk about is predatory violence, right? But it doesn't always have to be violent. That's the thing that is most messed up about sexual assault specifically, but really any kind of assault, any kind of abusive behavior. The process is always the same. The process is usually emotional. And and it's usually emotional debt. You somehow owe them, you're somehow responsible for it, you somehow have to do something to please them. That's how all trafficking occurs. Like anytime you're throwing absolutes, it gets a little weird, but a lot of trafficking occurs based off of debt of some kind. Addiction, which is a type of debt. You become enslaved basically to the drug or to the alcohol, or you become enslaved to the person. And that's a lot of times emotional. So I like to start these discussions with boundary setting. Because boundary setting to me, even out in the wild, how are you going to know that somebody is preying upon you? You don't always know, because here's why. In the same way that Uncle Joe has been given access to you and you're raised with Uncle Joe and he might be abusing you your whole life, you are expected to live by a certain amount of social norms. If I meet Vicky, it's out in public, the expectation is that we're going to be nice to each other. It's bartering, right? I'm bartering with her that she's going to be nice to me and I'm going to be nice to her. We have to recognize that predators know that. They're the nicest people you're ever going to know. They're the most charming people you're ever going to know. They're going to take advantage of you because of that charm and because of that niceness. I like to refer to it as active, because they act nice, they act charming. It's always bartering. You're always getting something in return for being nice. It can just be getting nice response back. A predator knows that and he uses that. Could you help me get this thing in my car? Fake cast on. There was a study done in NYU, I believe. This guy did a study where he put a fake cast on his arm, left the trunk of his car open, approached 18 different women to help him load stuff into his car. Every one of them did it. In the trunk of his car, obviously he could have just shoved them in there. We act on this nice thing. So boundary setting, what I want you to first know is that it's okay to have them. It's okay to set them. It's okay to use them. What you don't ever have to do is apologize for having them, and you don't have to feel bad for employing them. Most of the time when I meet people, particularly women, they're taught to be nice all the time. And so the niceness goes something like this. I come up and I'm standing too close to Vicky. Vicky doesn't say a word. Even though she feels uncomfortable, she doesn't say a word. If she does, it's like she adjusts, right? And there's nothing wrong with this. I'm just telling you the way it is, right? And when you get to a place where you actually verbalize, say like, would you mind, not doing that? Would you stop, please? Makes me uncomfortable. All those like hedging. Right? You're basically telling me as a predator that your boundary's not that strong, that you're not that strong. And we know that's not true. That's how a predator takes it. If I engage, for example, a stalker and I say, stop calling me, every time he calls me on the 25th call, I pick it up and say, stop calling me, he's still engaging me, which is exactly what he wants. So there comes a point where you just set the boundary and that's that, and you don't apologize for it. You don't have to worry about it. But it's very important, I think, for people to understand that much more can be accomplished with non-physical means than physical means most of the time. You can employ this stuff at work. You already do it. But we're going to work through a scale, a spectrum. When you say, for example, I don't want to be talked to that way, you're setting a boundary. If you don't ever verbalize it, obviously I'm never going to know, and I'm just going to keep doing whatever works for me. So you have to be able to verbalize. That's one step. You have to be okay with what you verbalize, and you have to decide beforehand kind of what you are okay with doing about it. Most people don't do that step. You want to decide what you're willing and unwilling to accept, right? That's your boundary, and that boundary can apply to, like, if I'm going to loan this tool out to somebody, I want to get it back in this kind of condition, and you set that as a verbal boundary to someone. I'm loaning you this, I want it back by Friday, and make sure it's in good working order. Whatever, right? That's setting a boundary. We do it all the time, but what we don't do is we don't define, if that doesn't happen, what are we going to do about it? So when you get into self-defense situations, you have to have some sense of what you're willing to do to protect yourself, okay? Because that's what a boundary is, right? If I go, no, stop, you need to stop doing that, well, what am I going to do if he doesn't? Because a boundary is only as good as you have defined what's going to happen when it breaks. Somebody breaks into your house, that's a boundary, right? It's a physical boundary. They bust the door down. What are you going to do about it? Do you have a plan for that? Do you know how you're going to exit the building? Do you know how you're going to defend your children who are on the other side of the house? Do you know how you're going to access whatever means of protection you want? Do you know how you're going to call on the phone, right? You do the same thing. You need to learn to do the same thing in conversation. Happened to me about a week ago. Had a homeless guy, or at least seemingly homeless guy in Durham, come to me. You've probably had this happen if you've been in Durham at all. Walks right up, wants to have a conversation that to me should not happen at that space because I have no idea who this guy is. At that point I was racist, I was called all kinds of names. So what I know from that, he was predatory. I immediately know he's predatory because he's offended by the fact that I want more space. Why would you be offended otherwise? Everybody wants space. There's no reason not to say, I don't know you. Why are you so close to me? I'm not being a jerk. I'm just telling him I'm not comfortable. And I don't have to make him move like a lot of people will say, you need to step back. And you don't control that person. If you want to step back, that's totally cool. Make the space, put your hands up. This is my boundary, right? I like to do this. I like to have my hands moving. Hey, I don't want any situations with you. I'll move back, but you're too close to me in any case, right? Those are the kinds of conversations you can have, and you do that all day long. Every place you go, every situation you're in has a context. At the club, you have a different set of boundaries. Home, you have a different set of boundaries. Work, you have a different set. When you're in your car and somebody scratches your car, obviously, you have boundaries for all kinds of things. So all I'm asking, how do I define what they are? And you just do that by asking questions like, what am I willing and unwilling to accept in language? What am I willing and unwilling to accept in the work environment for touch or how to be spoken to? I have a full list of those that I teach when people get really involved. But the purpose isn't to overcomplicate your life, but there are some critical things, right? You have to determine what's really important to yourself. What do you want to protect? How do you want to protect it? After that, situational awareness, environmental awareness. Environmental awareness is knowing that there's an exit door, knowing that there's a room in here I could barricade, another exit door, that's environmental. So if I was being approached by 9 or 10 people, how the hell would I get out of here, right? And it isn't about being paranoid. It's just about kind of building a process. Like if I'm walking down the street and I see something developing that I think is odd, what am I going to become aware of to know that I can get out of that right now? That's really what it is. That's where you employ environmental awareness. Situational awareness is knowing that something weird is developing. That can happen in a lot of different ways. Usually the most common one I see, before we go too far, I do want to say, if you've ever had some sort of traumatic experience and any of this bothers you, sit. Just take a seat. It's not uncommon. Every time I teach a class where there's a lot of women, always somebody who takes the seat, doesn't want to participate in something. Because we deal with things like chokes, grabs, and holds, and sometimes that's historical for people. So they want to take a seat. That's totally cool. I can't know everybody's history, so you got to be responsible for your own history. So if we were strangers in the street, and just stay right there, mind your own business, right? And I was to do this, right? Right? You would know that I'm going to probably hit him if I'm moving that fast, right? Now, if I take that same approach and I'm like this, totally different, yeah? We do this all the time. We don't know that we're doing it, but the more that we educate it, the better we get at it, right? When you start to look at how people approach you, how they talk to you, that's situational awareness. And it doesn't always have to be single engagement. It could be that 3 guys are standing over here, you're on the other side of the street, you're walking, you notice them, they're talking to each other, they look at you, they stop talking, one comes across the street. Obviously, this is a thing. How are you going to exit? That's environmental awareness. Because the goal here is not to engage, the goal is to get home. In self-defense, the issue isn't how do I get better at fighting, it's how do I not fight at all, I want to get the hell out of it. And mostly anymore, you can't be sure of any success. There used to be sort of like, I don't know that predators ever used it, but when I was a kid, if 2 guys were fighting, you let them fight. Now it's 2 guys are fighting, somebody might boot you in the head, kick you off, and another guy hits you, that kind of thing happens. There's a lot more of that kind of violence now than I think there has been in the past. Those kinds of things are why we work to avoid any kind of confrontation really with particularly with an unknown threat. Somebody you don't know, somebody you don't have any history with, that's the easiest typically to avoid. Part of situational awareness, environmental awareness can also be if you work in a rough neighborhood, you know you're going to have to work late. How are you going to change the situation so you don't have to walk to your car alone at night? My daughter, she works in downtown Durham. The other night we had to park the car about a block and a half away or something. Before I left, we all talked about how she was going to get to her car. Very minor, took a second, but that little step doesn't leave her stranded then trying to figure it out. So it's just little things that you can do that will stack the deck in your behalf and make it harder to become a victim. 55% takes place in the home. So I have a couple books on Amazon. I was actually hoping to have some here today in case somebody wanted one. I have one on sexual violence, and in that book, I had women tell me their stories, and actually a couple of guys. And there was a story in there by a woman who had been sexually abused by her father, physically abused. But she could tell whether she was going to be sexually abused or physically abused at any given time based on what substance take. She knew how it was going to fare out. And that went on until she was 13. And at 13, she set her boundary. Now, because it had gotten so out of control, she set her boundary by knife point. Ended the situation, but it took another 4 years before anybody would believe her. Homes that are broken tend to have more of that. Homes where there's boyfriends living in there tend to have more of that. Homes where there's the stepfather usually, stepmothers as well, but typically more on the male side. Those are homes where there's a lot more tendency for violence and abuse. So what I like to do with the boundary thing again is like with children, set the boy and the girls together, teach them how to set boundaries from little on up. So everybody knows that everybody else has boundaries, and you're teaching them then how to communicate about boundaries. So if you have kids, they may not be here, but you can still bring this home and teach them how to do that. I'm always surprised at what I think people get. I like to fill in as much as possible.
This is how he talks to me.
Oh yeah.
Like this, and and I'll stand here and I said, like Mr. So-and-so, can you move back some? He's also fresh. He just walks right, very slow walking, but I could be doing something and all of a sudden I look, he's like right here. Like, can you back up some? Because I tell him, you're too close to me, back up. So is that okay?
Absolutely. And whether he does it or not, you should set the boundary. If you tend to see somebody coming at you, you don't have to wait. We call it putting up a fence. As soon as you see him coming at you, just
like he's looking for me, and I just go a different ways.
Yeah, I feel like healthcare is actually one of the tougher areas. I mean, I know a surgeon at Duke. She's had her life threatened. Saving a gang member. Another gang member comes in, tries to kill, wants to kill him, and they have to shut the hospital down. Healthcare is a crazy field. First responders actually get attacked quite often. Long-term healthcare facilities, there's this degradation of psyche, which also adds to it all. I was military police and did security and stuff, worked in a mental health facility for a while, and tough positions. It sounds like you're handling it pretty well, but just don't be apologetic about it, because out of practice we tend to do that. We tend to try to be soft and nice, and we just don't have to be. We don't have to apologize for having a boundary. We don't have to be an asshole about it, but you don't have to be nice either. You can just be polite. You can just be like, I need more room. Setting boundaries that are very clear, very distinct. Leave no room for second guessing that you've tried to set a boundary. Because again, once you know that there's a boundary in place, if I'm offended by that boundary, it's because I had intent that was probably not good. Why else would it matter to me? I would want to respect you otherwise. So there's some reciprocation that occurs, and if it doesn't occur, then you know that there's some sort of predatory behavior behind it. It, again, doesn't always mean it's going to become violent. It doesn't always mean any of that. A homeless guy who approached me, he started cursing me, yelling at me, calling me all kinds of names, on and on and on and on. But I've actually also had vendors do this to others. Had a woman who cleaned the facility. They decided they were going to move to an in-house person, so they wanted to end the contract. She got angry about it. Honestly, she's overcharging, but that's a whole thing. That's a predatory thing. Still the same process. There's no difference in it. She was offended, accused them of being racist, and it was a 30-minute tirade before she left the building. All of this is because it was hurting her income. It's a different kind of predatory situation, but there's no end to how they occur. We came here today, the lady late unlocking. Vicky's boundary is that she wants the damn thing open when it's supposed to be open. And that's not an unreasonable thing. When it's supposed to be open, it should be open. So then the thing would be, what is she willing to do about that? She could confront the girl, which sounds like you've done before maybe. It led nowhere, really, because she still takes her time, does whatever she's going to do, and then you're supposed to feel bad about wanting it. And her decision has to be then, what is she willing to do next? That's how boundaries are set, and that's how boundaries are then kept. If you're not willing to move them forward, then they're not really a boundary. So that's the kind of thing that we do it all the time. There's different kinds of space. So I talk about space control quite a bit. So what you did to me is really close, uncomfortably close for me. It makes it very difficult from a self-defense perspective, because it's not a damn thing you can do at that space. Right? And what are you going to do? There's no time. You can't react. It's very, very hard. So you have to break social norms, figure out how you're going to open up space, how you're going to shift and adjust and get yourself ready without being all like, I'd be funny to watch, but so every time somebody rolls up on you, what's your space going to be? How are you going to set space? How are you going to control space? You can ask somebody to move, but since you don't control them, you have to control yourself. A lot of times you're going to get cursed out, and all that stuff, particularly again if it's predatory. So we're going to start with a really simple exercise. So I want you to kind of work together in pairs. As somebody approaches you, you're just going to put your hands up, kind of around shoulder height, and just give yourself a little space and say, hold on, give me a minute. Something a little bit, less like, stop, you're a jerk. More like, I'll be with you in a minute. Give me a second. Because a lot of people will wait thinking they're still going to get something, and you don't really actually even have to continue the conversation after that a lot of times. You're just going to do that real simple, and then we'll move into some more physical stuff as we get confusion in the process. You will know exactly where you stand when you follow the processes in this book, and it also does a great job of teaching you how to build enforceable boundaries. So setting them in a way that's contextually correct and that makes sense, and so you have a way to do it. This book is pretty thorough on boundaries, and it's not just for women and children, it's for men. I use these strategies in my own life, in my work life, in my home life. Fantastic.